let's get started. Thank you so much for joining for the 4th episode of our Conquering Cancer Together series. My name is Sarah Herrington. I am the nutritionist here at Brio-Medical in Scottsdale, Arizona, where it's usually sunny, but we're going through a little bit of rain at the moment. I truly am honored and excited to be speaking to you all today and to hopefully clear the air on many things. So we're here to talk about food. And I don't know about all of you, but I really like food. So much so that I based my career around it. Food's a huge part of our lives. We eat 3 to 4 times a day. It's a huge part of our families and our cultures and our identities, holidays and anniversaries and technical adjustment, holidays, special occasions, weddings, so many really large and impactful events in our lives, they revolve around food. Food's powerful. It connects us with people that we love and people that we care about. Food's also powerful in healing. Good nutrition can be the foundation that supports the body through cancer treatment. It can help to prevent cancer from occurring in the first place, and arguably can be a form of immunotherapy in and of itself. Now, what we like and what we don't like in terms of food is pretty straightforward, right? I don't like tomatoes, but I like mushrooms. These concepts are pretty simple to us. We learn these things early on in life. Our preferences are taught to us from our families, from our cultures. Yet when it comes to cancer and nutrition, it's really not so simple. There's so many different theories and ideas and dietary patterns and internet experts claiming that this is the best diet, or this is the best diet, or this is the best food, or this is a superfood. I can't tell you how many patients have come into my office and told me that their oncologist told them that diet didn't matter at all and didn't matter what they ate. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to take a deep dive into some of your controversial and most pressing questions when it comes to what you should eat to either support cancer treatment or to prevent cancer or all things related. And I'm going to try to make my answers as digestible, first pun of the day, as I can. Try to, make it simple for you, because I know it can be so confusing to go through all of this information. So to start us off, I am actually going to, we had so many questions that were submitted ahead of time, which is awesome. A lot of these questions are very similar. So I hope if I don't get a chance to answer your specific question, that I answer another question that gives you the answer that you're looking for. If not, hopefully there's a chance in the future for us to get to it. But this question comes from Martha in Newton, Massachusetts. So hi, Martha. Thanks for joining us. Martha asks, could you set us straight on sugar and how to achieve a low glucose diet? Yes. So I'm sure we've all heard that sugar feeds cancer and that cancer loves sugar. Why? Well, first let's look at some of the evidence, or talk about some of the evidence that we have to say that this is the case. Okay? So one of the pioneers of research in this area, his name is Thomas Seyfried. Now, he has delved pretty deep into different aspects of this, but we can use one of his studies as an example. Okay? So he took mice, and they gave these mice tumors. It's easier to give a mouse a tumor than it is a human a tumor. So they then replicated these studies in humans, but first did them in mice. Mice that had higher blood glucose saw substantially greater tumor growth than mice that had lower blood glucose. Now, this was then replicated in humans, obviously not by giving them tumors, but in humans with glioblastomas. Now, in humans with glioblastomas, those who had lower blood glucose had greater rates of survival. Now, I digress. Correlation does not equal causation, but this does support Otto Warburg's theory, which was the observation that tumor cells rely heavily on glycolysis through a process of lactic acid fermentation. And this provides the energy needed for cellular proliferation. Now, this process really is a backup system for cellular energy production, but the main mechanism that cancer cells rely on. All right. Also, don't forget to pop your questions into the chat because we will get to those. Now, so cancer cells are relying on this backup system to create energy. That regular cells have this backup system, but cancer cells rely on it. Once upon a time, cells existed on Earth in the absence of oxygen, right? Now, currently, we define standards of life as usually requiring oxygen to survive, which is why when we look for life on other planets, we look for water, which is oxygen and hydrogen. Now, a hallmark of tumor cells is damaged cellular respiration. Now, generally, mitochondria of a cell require oxygen to produce energy and carry out basic functions such as proliferation, replication. And yet tumor cells can exist independent of oxygen and proper respiration. And they can do this through creating energy through fermentation, which doesn't require oxygen. So this is really an ancient pathway of cellular metabolism that tumor cells rely on. Now, this fermentation is of two major sources. One of them is glucose, and the other one is the amino acid glutamine. And there are cases where cells may rely on other methods of energy metabolism, such as with certain genetic mutations that may rely more heavily on things like lipids. But the glucose metabolism will still be present. So that's the sciencey explanation of how sugar can, quote unquote, feed cancer. So the second part of this question was how to achieve a low glucose diet. So glucose, sugar, the easiest way to achieve a low glucose diet is to avoid sugar, right? White sugar, even more natural forms of sugar. You know, we think even even if some of these things have a lower glycemic index, things like honey and maple syrup and agave nectar, these items still elicit a pretty significant glycemic response, especially if they're consumed standalone. So we want to avoid sweets. We want to avoid desserts. We want to avoid putting extra sugar in our coffee. Then there are other foods that break down very quickly into sugar in our bodies. So obviously refined carbohydrates, things like breads, cereals, pastas, all of these things just very quickly digest, and then our body utilizes them. White potatoes, white rice, even brown rice, there isn't much of a glycemic difference between white and brown rice. There are ways, however, that you can mitigate the glycemic response of some of these foods. You can slow down their breakdown. So let's say you have a piece of white bread. You have a piece of white bread by itself, that's going to break down really fast. You're going to digest that very, very, very quickly. You have a piece of white bread with a hard-boiled egg, which has fats and it has proteins. And then you put a tablespoon of almond butter on that white bread. That significantly slows down the rate of digestion of that piece of white bread. So that is one strategy to help to transition you to eliminating some of these things from your diet, is to not consume them by themselves. Oh, what else? Other strategies to a low glucose diet. Everybody reacts to foods differently. So something that I find really, really handy is, yes, the questions work. Yes, I can see them. Something, so feel free to, if something to say, if you have a question about it, feel free to pop it into the chat. Because someone asked, is it okay to check our postprandial glucose before each meal? So if that's actually relates to what I'm going to say now, we all react differently to different foods. For example, some people, a date is going to impact their blood glucose pretty significantly. And some people, they can eat a date and it's not. So using something like a blood glucose monitor before you eat to see what your blood glucose currently is, and then checking it maybe an hour or two after and seeing what the rate of change in that number is, can be a really handy tool to see how you react to different types of foods and kind of tailoring your diet in that way. So that's one really good strategy to simply finding out what works best for you in terms of following a low glycemic diet and what foods you can pair together to minimize your glycemic response. Then, of course, portion sizes, meal structure. So eating vegetables, proteins, fats prior to eating your starches, that can also minimize the glycemic response that you get from your food. Going for a walk after your meals, that can help as well. All right. So, Martha, I hope that explains it for you. I hope that narrows it down a little bit. Kind of gives you some direction in terms of how the relationship between sugar and cancer work and why it's a good thing to steer clear from best you can. Someone asked in the chat, is there an ideal glucose level? Hi, Cher. Thanks for joining us. There are theoretical ideals for fasting blood glucose, generally, it's good to see that number fall below 90. I generally say that after a meal, you don't necessarily want to see the increase in your blood glucose rise more than 20 or 30 points if you're going for a low glycemic response from your meal. But that being said, every individual is different. So what is a good blood glucose number for an optimal blood glucose range for one individual may not be the optimal blood glucose range for another individual. So it's kind of something that you have to take with a little bit of a grain of salt and find what trends, where you trend at, and kind of make a determination there based on your own health. Okay. Can you recommend a glucose monitor? I love the Keto Mojo devices. Those are awesome because it's going to take both your blood glucose and it's going to tell you your ketones, which I'm sure we will talk about later in this conversation about why ketones, in addition to blood glucose, can be good metrics. All righty. Thanks for that, Martha. Okay. So this is another question that was submitted ahead of time. So this is from Morgan from New Jersey. My mom's from New Jersey. What should be avoided in terms of diet and what should be emphasized? Also, any particular supplements that are helpful? Well, we already went over sugar, but there are some additional things that generally across the board would be good to avoid as well for most individuals. Now, that being said, this isn't taking into account personal preference. This isn't taking into account your lifestyle. Diet is so individualized. So these are really general recommendations. Gluten. Gluten's interesting. I'm sure gluten-free diets are trendy. And not everybody has a intolerance to gluten, and not everybody has celiac disease, which is the actual autoimmune condition associated with a gluten intolerance, basically. But gluten can still cause the intestinal barrier to become more permeable. 70% of the protein in gluten is called gliadin. Now, zonulin is a protein in your body that increases the permeability of the cells that line your digestive tract. And gliadin activates zonulin signaling regardless of the genetic expression of autoimmunity or an allergy to gluten, which can lead to increased intestinal permeability. Increased intestinal permeability can contribute to increased systemic inflammation, potentially. So it's something to keep in mind in terms of optimizing your diet. On that same line, obviously refined carbohydrates for the same reason as sugar, but also refined carbohydrates tend to be just devoid of nutrients in general, just because they're so incredibly processed. So you're better off eating something that's a little bit more nutrient dense. There's food that is classified in the same category for cancer risk as smoking tobacco and asbestos. They're group 1 carcinogens. Processed meat is one of those. So hot dogs, sausages, All of those, their production creates polycyclical aromatic hydrocarbons. And these are highly carcinogenic chemicals, in addition to NOCs, in addition to the chemicals that are created in the process of cooking things at high temperatures, which is something also to try to avoid. That process creates AGEs, advanced glycation end products, which can build up in the body and lead to oxidative stress, aromatic amines. So processed meat. We definitely want to avoid processed meat. Now, red meat's kind of a controversial one. Technically, it's regarded as a group 2 carcinogen, probably carcinogenic. The reason for that is it's usually cooked at a high temperature. We usually grill meat, or we sear it in a pan at a high temperature, which creates these compounds that are carcinogenic. But red meat is very high in iron. Now, the concept of iron being necessary for cancer cell survival and proliferation is pretty well established. It's even more so with types of cancer like pancreatic and prostate cancer. Now, the type of iron that's in red meat, in animal proteins in general, is called heme iron. Now, heme iron, it's a different type of iron than the iron that's in plant foods. It's a different type of iron than the iron that you're going to find in spinach or lentils. And this type of iron is really bioavailable. We can absorb almost all of it that we consume, and it's in high concentrations in red meat. So that itself is a reason alone to be wary and to limit your consumption of it. So those are kind of the big ones. Dairy is another honorable mention. The most recent statistic that I saw on dairy, 68% of people on Earth are lactose intolerant. Our ancestors have to be from a pretty specific place in Europe for us to have all of the enzymes necessary in our digestive system to be able to process dairy effectively, therefore potentially contributing to gut dysbiosis. Now, there are tests that you can run to determine whether or not you process lactose effectively, but that is one of the major reasons why generally dairy is one of the ones that would be on the list to avoid. What about Ezekiel bread? Ezekiel bread, so something like that's a good question, David. That something like a sprouted wheat bread, that is going to be an exponentially better option than something like Wonder Bread. The sprouted grains are going to act a little bit differently in the gut than a refined flour, so that is a much better option. Again, circling back, everybody reacts to foods differently, so from a glycemic perspective, that might be something that worth kind of testing on yourself, but it is a better option than other options. All right. What should be emphasized? What should be emphasized? Well, plant stuff. I know that sounds kind of abstract, but whole foods, whole natural foods, low glycemic vegetables, nuts, seeds, oils, things that come from the ground, wild caught animal proteins when you're going to have them, eggs. natural foods, organic foods. The exact nutrients can be on a individual case, but in general, you want to stick to things that are real, things that exist in nature, things that our ancestors ate quite a while ago. All right. Supplement-wise, there are tons that can potentially be helpful. Again, that's something that is also very individualized and something that really needs to be on a case-by-case basis in terms of other medications that individual may be on, other nutrient deficiencies that individual may have, treatments that they are undergoing, but some that are potentially beneficial. High-dose melatonin possesses really powerful antioxidant properties. Vitamin D, really important for the immune system. Berberine, curcumin, all of these have some promising research behind them in terms of how they can positively impact cancer cells, whether that's by modulating treatment or having a direct effect on tumor cells themselves, or reducing inflammation or increasing immunity. So there's lots of really good stuff out there. Honorable mention would be probiotics as well, because our microbiome so heavily modulates our immune system, guys. It so heavily modulates our immune system. Your microbiome is kind of a training ground for all intents and purposes for your immune system. It educates your immune cells. It teaches them to recognize and respond to threats. It's kind of like a boot camp. And there's usually a difference in the gut composition of healthy individuals and those with cancer. And the composition, it affects the outcomes of, or it can potentially affect the outcomes of treatments. And there are specific microbes that can enhance therapeutic effects of drugs or mitigate side effects. So certain strains of probiotics as well. All right. There's a question that just popped into the chat from Claudia. How important is juicing? And this is very similar to a question that from Clarette from the Philippines, who asks the benefit of a healthy diet and juicing to cancer patients. So let's talk about juicing. This is a good one, okay? Realistically, why juicing is great is because you can get a whole lot of nutrients that you could otherwise get in eating a really big volume of food, in this much liquid. So from just from a straight feasibility standpoint, it makes sense to drink juice. You're getting a really good concentration of vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, antioxidants, which is fantastic. Where we run into an issue with juicing is that when you take a fruit or you take a vegetable and you put it into a juicer, you are taking away the most, if not all, of the fibers that are in that fruit or vegetable. And what you're left with is water and nutrients, but potentially a whole lot of sugar. So if we're having a bolus serving of 32 ounces of juiced fruit, that ends up being a really significant amount of sugar that elicits a really significant and quick glycemic response. So in that regard, then we run into some issues with juicing. So when it comes to juicing, the best thing to do in this, if you can juice exclusively leafy greens and celery and cucumber and green vegetables, then you're getting a really good profile of nutrients. However, if you're throwing in fruits and more root vegetables, then you run the risk of that being just a really high glycemic drink. So you're still getting a lot of vitamins, minerals, antioxidants out of it. So juicing can be a tool. But it should not be necessarily relied on as the do-all, end-all of diet and cancer. All right. Claudia said, then a NutriBullet that does not take the fiber out would be better. Yes. Actually, I just saw a study, and this was last week, that compared the glycemic response from fruit that was blended versus fruit that was eaten whole. And there was very, very little, if any, difference in the glycemic response from taking an average group of individuals. It wasn't just one person, it was a group of individuals that they looked at the glycemic response from blended fruit versus whole fruit. And the glycemic response wasn't too different. So yes, blending fruit is a better option in terms of the glycemic load than juicing fruit. Okie dokie. Let's go to Lori. Now, Lori, I apologize. Maybe we didn't have where you are located in our little handy dandy question sheet here, but you asked a really good question. What do you suggest to prevent recurrence in those who have had hormone-positive breast cancer? Well, first, I imagine you've had a very long journey, so commendations to you. There are a lot of things that you can do, and a lot of these cross over to a lot of cancer prevention type things that all of us should adhere to all the time anyway. But have you ever heard of nutrigenomics? So nutrigenomic testing can look at an individual's genetic makeup. Now, our genes can actually modulate if we need more of certain nutrients, less of certain nutrients. They can modulate types of exercise that might be best for us. They can modulate how well we detox from toxins. Our genes impact the way all of our body functions. Now, we can actually get a snapshot of a lot of these things that can tell us some really good information, especially when it comes to hormones. For example, how well methylation is supported, because there are certain SNPs, especially of MTHFR genes, that are linked to breast cancer. So by doing testing in this area, you could potentially see if there's a need for support in methylation. Do we need more folate? Do we need more B vitamins in the diet or through supplementation? You can also see if there's additional nutrients or phytonutrient requirements that should be met through diet. Do we need more lycopene? Do we need more tomatoes and red peppers? Do we need an increased intake of omega-3s? Do we need to decrease saturated fat intake from things like coconut oil? Is the microbiome predisposed to the absorption of certain nutrients better? We can find out a lot of these things through this type of testing, which can allow us to really personalize our diet to our body, which is really quite incredible. Now this area is really still developing. We're still learning a lot of things. But it offers a lot of promise in terms of prevention and preventing recurrence. But there's other things that you can do as well in terms of your diet as well as your lifestyle. Low glycemic diets, maintaining a healthy weight through exercise, which also helps to boost the immune system. Minimizing alcohol consumption, which is linked to many different types of cancer, including many different high antioxidant rich foods that support hormonal balance, things like green tea, beans, cruciferous vegetables, fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, and greens to support estrogen modulating gut bacteria, flax oil, flax seeds. So I hope that helps, Lori. I hope that gives you some direction, some things that you can potentially explore. Okay. Awesome question that just popped into the chat from Rosa. All right. Some people say soy is good in breast cancer, assuming this is not GMO and organic. Others are against eating any type of soy in breast. I'm sorry, I can't read that last part. Estrogen positive, I believe. What do you think? Well, thank you for that question. It's not really, honestly, it's not what I think. It's what data says in this area, because this is a really hot topic, and this has been a hot topic for a while, because for a while soy was on the big no list. Soy was on the big no list. There's a lot of people that still say that soy increases estrogen, because what soy contains compounds called phytoestrogens. And for a long time, these were believed to have an additive effect to estrogen levels in the body. However, from what the research we have now, it seems that phytoestrogens can actually function as a selective estrogen receptor modulator and disrupt estrogen signaling pathways. Recently, actually, they're used in medical nutrition therapy nowadays for helping to reduce estrogen dominance. It's prescribed to be eating a couple times a week if you're estrogen dominant to help lower those levels. Now, this is speaking strictly about, non-GMO, organic, dietary soy, not soy supplementation. That being said, we do know that the organic, non-GMO, fermented tofu, tempeh is safe, edamame is safe. We don't have the research to confirm if processed soy, so textured soy protein, if that's safe. So that's best to stay away from. And soy certainly isn't something that you necessarily want to do every single day, because you wouldn't want to have any food every single day, because variety in the diet is important. But there isn't research currently that suggests that soy is going to have a significant negative effect in the case of breast cancer, and can potentially be helpful in balancing hormone levels. So I hope that kind of clears it up a little bit. All right. There we go. All right. Yes, it is very, soy is very confusing. All right, so I'm going to answer another one of the questions that was submitted ahead of time, which was from Wanda in St. Petersburg. So Wanda says, I am underweight. Is there a way I can prevent losing weight while doing a cancer diet? And that's a really good question, because you, Wanda, are not alone in this concern. There's a lot of people who are diagnosed with cancer who are underweight to begin with, and then there are a lot of things that can happen during cancer treatment or during a cancer journey that can contribute to weight loss. Some of these contributors are side effects of treatment, side effects of chemotherapy, changes in food choices, calorie restriction, even if it's accidental. Let's say a side effect of your treatment is you're nauseous. Realistically, you're going to eat less, right? You're not feeling great. That, all of those kind of fall into the category of therapeutic weight loss. Now, there's also what we can consider pathological weight loss associated with cancer, which would be the breakdown of muscle tissue, partly due to the utilization of glutamine in tumor cells, the increased metabolic activity. All of that can lead to weight loss, cachexia, muscle wasting to different degrees. Now, there can be a little bit of a crossover between the two, between the therapeutic aspect of the weight loss and the pathological aspect of the weight loss. But there is a point where that can be concerning, both for an individual and for the treatment team. It sounds counterintuitive because there are a lot of things that you would see in the media and kind of see popularized about a ketogenic diet and weight loss, because ketogenic diet is a really popular method to lose weight for a lot of people. But a ketogenic diet can actually be a successful method for the treatment of cachexia and to assist with weight loss during cancer treatment and to prevent weight loss during cancer treatment. There was a study by, I believe one of the authors was, I want to say her last name was Shukla, that proved that a ketogenic diet can reverse systemic inflammation and muscle wasting, particularly by downregulating pro-inflammatory cytokines and metabolites that are involved in cachexia. And a ketogenic diet has inherent muscle-preserving effect. Ketone bodies may have anti-catabolic effects during inflammatory muscle atrophy. Because when the body is running on ketones, shifting to fat metabolism, the body attempts to spare proteins. It attempts to spare muscle. Now, also when we're thinking about what we're actually eating, a gram of carbohydrates has 4 calories. A gram of fats has 9. So you take a tablespoon of olive oil, 2 tablespoons of olive oil. That's not very much food. It's really quite a small amount. And that's over 200 calories. In order to get 200 calories from carbohydrates, you need over half a cup of oats or rice. So in terms of sheer volume of being able to get food into your body, it makes the feasibility of that and the ease of eating, just in general and quality of life, a ketogenic diet makes that process easy. In addition to that, you're going to want to look at your overall caloric needs, how much you're eating, make sure you're eating enough. That's something that a nutritionist or a doctor can look at with you and evaluate, because ultimately the total caloric intake is going to account for weight loss as well. That's also going to be something to take into account. Okay. Let's go back to some of the questions in the chat. Would nutrition requirements and restrictions be different if the cancer patient is a child? Yes and no. Children have different nutrient needs than adults. Their bodies are still growing. The focus on nutrients and vitamins and minerals, and those are going to be different. The amount of calories that they're going to need are going to be different. So in that regard, yes, in making sure they're getting all of the vitamins and minerals that are needed to ensure proper growth is going to be very, very important. In terms of dietary pattern suggestion, in terms of low glycemic or ketogenic, not necessarily. There can still be some crossover. What is true from a dietary perspective, what is true therapeutically for assisting treatment in an adult is going to be true in terms of the therapeutic benefit in the body in a child. The concern and the focus is going to need to be in terms of making sure all of the nutrient requirements are met outside of that dietary pattern for that child. I hope that answers that question. Okay. Let's go to another question that was submitted ahead of time. Let's see if I can find it here. Okay. Man. Okay, this is from Maria in San Diego. Is a raw food diet good for cancer? Well, yes and no. Yes and no. Raw fruits and vegetables and fruits and vegetables in general have a lot of beneficial nutrients in them. And if you're not cooking fruits and vegetables, there's not necessarily a risk of the degradation of nutrient availability from the foods due to the heat and the processing. They contain antioxidants and phytonutrients for all intents and purposes in their purest form, right? There's lots of fiber in raw fruits and vegetables. There's soluble fiber. So soluble fiber dissolves in water and kind of acts like a sponge, which, because it creates like a sticky bolus, like a small gel-like mass, it helps to lower your blood glucose. It also works with your liver to escort excess hormones like estrogen from the body. So that can be potentially beneficial. So sources like chia, flax, nuts, seeds, citrus fruit, these raw foods can be beneficial and therapeutic. Insoluble fiber. Insoluble fiber does not dissolve in water. It kind of acts like a broom. It facilitates movement of food through the digestive tract. It contributes to bulking up stool. So it promotes regularity. It reduces constipation and keeps the gut healthy. Cruciferous vegetables, avocados. Then you have resistant starch from things like green bananas, plantains, nuts, seeds that feed good bacteria. So you have a lot of good nutrients in raw fruits, vegetables. But eating exclusively raw foods can, in a lot of people, lead to a lot of GI upset. Because these foods, in general, due to their high content of fibers and the lack of breakdown prior to you consuming them, means that your body has to do a whole lot of more work. So if there's gut dysbiosis, if there's treatment that be impacting your GI system, all of this can contribute to GI discomfort, which can negatively impact quality of life. It is also very difficult to meet all of your nutrient requirements if you're exclusively eating raw foods. It's not impossible. You can do it. But it takes a lot of effort. It takes, you have to be so on top of your nutrients all of the time in order to meet your needs when you're eating raw foods. Otherwise, you're going to miss out on quite a few essential vitamins and minerals just because they're not present in the foods that you are able to eat without cooking. So you run the risk of malnutrition unless you're under direct supervision or you're, not part of the 0.0001% of the population who is willing to do that work. But for most people, it's unrealistic and it's unsustainable. And if it's unrealistic and it's unsustainable, then it's not going to work for that individual. It's not going to work for that individual's life. And it's potentially going to cause stress. It's not something they're going to be able to stick to long term. And then it becomes, in my opinion, something that isn't therapeutic and something that is just an additional stressor. So part of the argument for a raw food diet is that by preparing food and cooking food, you are degrading some of the nutrients that are in it. But there's this really cool study that I use all the time, and I'm so sorry I can't remember the name of it, but these researchers, they took all of these vegetables and they cooked them in all of these different ways. And then they measured the antioxidant capacity of these vegetables post cooking them. Okay? And the differences in them, they varied by the cooking method, but I think it was celery. Almost every single method of cooking celery, except for boiling it, increased the antioxidant capacity of the celery. So, and there was many vegetables in this study that actually showed that microwaving the vegetables increased their antioxidant availability, which sometimes we have to question what we think we understand, what we think makes sense. When it does, generally, just to circle back, when it comes to cooking vegetables, steaming tends to be best, just because steamed, they're not coming into direct contact with the water or the oil that's going to absorb any of the nutrients. So the thermal, and as well, the thermal degradation is minimized. But so, Maria, I hope that answers that question. It's really, diet is so individualized, but we do have to find something that's going to work for us long term. Okay. This is from Claudia. I see people eating a lot of salmon, thinking they are eating healthy. I have learned that farm-raised salmon can be one of the most toxic foods that one can eat. Do you agree with this? Yes and no. I am not sure I would say that farm-raised salmon is one of the most toxic foods that someone could eat. But it's certainly not a great one. So here's the thing. So a lot of salmon that you're going to see is it's going to say sustainable. Now, a lot of the times when a fish or a salmon says sustainable, that means that it is farmed in a way that doesn't necessarily impact the surrounding ecosystem. Because because we're overfishing in the ocean. So we're, hurting the populations of fish in the ocean, which is hurting the ecosystems in the ocean, which are important for the rest of the health, which is important for the health of the rest of the planet and our health. So in these farms, they're feeding, number one, they're small. They tend to be small areas where these fish are living and growing. So the fish are swimming around in their own fecal matter, which is pretty gross. And they're feeding them lots of byproducts, corn and soy and the things that you don't want to eat. And then they're feeding those to the fish. So that is then contaminating the meat, the flesh of those fish. So are they the most toxic thing that you can eat? That may be debatable. Are they great? No. I hope that that answers that question. All right. Let's do another one from the chat. Can you give us a link on where we can find healthy, doable recipes for cancer patients? So hard to think of food for them, thinking of all of the bad stuff. Thank you. That's a good question, and this is something that a lot of people ask me for quite a bit. It can be difficult to find resources out there, and sometimes you have to be picky. Admittedly, I have not found... and I do this every day, I have not found one resource where I'm like, this has everything. You can go here and you can use every single recipe that's on this website and they have everything that you need. Most of the time you have to shift through things and find stuff that's going to work for the dietary pattern that you're on or sub out ingredients, but there's still lots of good stuff that you can find. There is a cookbook called Ketotarian, which has a lot of really great keto-friendly vegetarian dishes. So that's a really good resource. And then there's a blog from a food blogger called All Day I Dream About Food. And this woman has different categories and different dietary patterns that she'll post recipes for. And so you can find them some that are dairy-free keto. You can find some that are vegan vegetarian, depending on what your drive is. But she has some really delicious things on there. So those are two resources that you could absolutely use. Okay. Now the last one that I want to answer is, I know I want to answer this one. I just see if I can find it. All right. This is from Ray from Texas. How to eliminate and or minimize cancer exposure with diet and nutrition. Now, we can't say that it's entirely possible to completely eliminate or eradicate your risk for getting cancer with diet and nutrition, but you can greatly improve your chances for all intents and purposes. And you can do that by focusing on what should be a true human diet, which is how we used to eat, which is whole foods, plant foods, natural foods, hunting, scavenging, nuts, seeds, berries, not McDonald's, not Twinkies, not chips, not all of these processed foods that our bodies aren't made to eat. You want to eat a diverse diet. You want to focus on plants and whole foods. You want to support detoxification pathways because there are other things in your environment that can potentially they're carcinogenic. There are other chemicals in our environment that we can't avoid. We can't avoid xenoestrogens all the time. We can't avoid all pesticides all the time. We can do our darndest, but there are some things that are just simply out of our control. But we can support detoxification pathways in the body that can help us clear out some of these toxins when we're exposed to them through a high antioxidant diet. So lots of leafy greens, berries, colorful foods. If you eat a wide variety of colors, you know you're getting a wide variety of nutrients because the different colors in your food account for the different nutrients that are in them. For mothers, breastfeed if you can. This is going to ensure the diversity of the gut microbiome of your child. That is a really important part of growth and development. Maintaining a healthy weight. Currently there are 13 different cancer types that we can link to overweight and obesity, but we can assume that there's more. So one of the best things that you can do is exercise, which also helps to boost your immune system. Be physically active. Limit sugar sweetened beverages. Limit your alcohol, which is, again, linked to an increased risk of breast cancer with just 3 to 6 drinks per week. And also a high association with GI and head and neck cancers. And stress less. Manage your stress. There is something called the mind-gut axis. There is this feedback loop between our head and our digestive system. And we know the microbiome is a big modulator of the immune system. It regulates our mood. It does so many things in our body. It is involved in so many processes, and we're still learning about a lot of these. So support the health of your microbiome and implement stress management techniques. Lots of things that you can do. Lots of things that you can do, but it starts with your lifestyle and starts with your diet. Well, we are out of time. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you got some good insight from this webinar. I hope you join us on future webinars. I hope you feel empowered to use some tips and tricks that we discussed in either your cancer treatment strategy or your cancer prevention strategy. And it was an honor to have the chance to speak with you all today. And I look forward to answering your questions again in the future.